Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 159 of the Meet the Farmers podcast with me, Ben Eagle. Now, there is a lot to cover on today's show with my guest. He's done a lot, he does a lot, and he's been on a bit of a regenerative farming journey for quite some time now. So I know a lot of listeners, you will be interested in hearing about his story and what he's learned so far. So definitely want to focus on that today. Stephen Ware from Throne Farm in Herefordshire is on the show. Stephen had a career at several big companies in the food sector before returning to his family's 320-acre farm in 2001. He expanded the business, particularly the commercial apple and pear orchards, but following a Nuffield scholarship and particularly a trip to Australia, he flipped his approach on its head and began focusing on regenerative principles. This is largely due, in part at least, to excess phosphorus in his soils, and we'll of course talk today also, following on from last week, about the River Wye situation, which we were engaging with Sarah James about. Please go back and listen to that episode if you haven't already. So his business is now mixed and includes some very interesting enterprises, including insects. Yes, you did hear that right, listeners. And they were recognised for all of this last year as a finalist in the BBC's Food and Farming Awards. Stephen, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for coming on. How are you doing?
Thanks, Ben. I think you covered it all. Shall we
I was going to say, that's it. Easy edit. That's it for today.
Perhaps I should say that the Nuffield Scholarship was a means to an end. I'd already sort of embarked on a few ideas, and I very much geared it around to things that I thought would help in my outlook on the farm.
Okay. No, definitely delving into that. So tell us about your part of Herefordshire, first of all.
It's the northwest corner of Herefordshire. So the nice thing is we have got great views of the Black Mountains, Haybluff Escarpment to the west, and to the north is the Radnor Hills. But we're in a little bit of a rain shadow here with some good soils and some gorgeous scenery.
No, it is a great part of the world. Give us some history of the farm, because your grandfather, I think, bought the farm in the 40s, and you've been there ever since. So what have been the changes since then?
Well, if you want the history before that, it's called Throne Farm because King Charles I stayed here when he was on the run from Cromwell.
I like that story.
Probably enjoyed drinking the perry and the cider that we made on the farm, which was then sold in the farmhouse, which was a coaching inn. And I remember playing hide and seek in the priest hole that they had there, and behind the grandfather clock.
Fantastic!
Great things. Then there's a diary of Thomas Bull, which is in the local museum, that chronicles the history of the farm through the repeal of the Corn Laws and all that, potato blight. So it's fascinating history there. Bringing that up to date, your grandfather came in, obviously the Dig for Victory initiative through the war, post-war, drained some of the meadows down the bottom of the farm, and it was a very mixed farm. And my father carried that tradition on, but we ended up turn of the century with poultry and just planted some intensive cider apple orchards and some wheat, and that was about it.
Yeah. And then can you bring us right up to date, because quite recently there've been quite a few changes, haven't there?
Yeah, really. Yeah, so bringing it up to date, you're looking at sort of growth metrics. So if you look at, I used to have a website that said I could fill, 50 swimming pools, Olympic-sized swimming pools with my apples. I could grow more chickens to stretch between here and Scotland. It was all about scale and volume, and I suppose that's the best way to compass what the changes have been, is just a different outlook. So I think I was the first person on the Goldman Sachs business development course to have a growth metric of increasing organic matter as one of my growth metrics.
Okay.
And so we've diversified. You used the word already, extensify. It actually doesn't mean anything, but we've extensified the business. I sort of think of it as the opposite of intensive. But we've changed from broiler growing to pullets, which is a little less. You don't have to just get the birds over the line to slaughter. You want to produce a bird that's got a longer lifespan, and so it's a bit less. You push them less. Similarly, in the orchards, less intensive. I planted a lot of trees. I think you're going to talk about that later, but they were on an M9 rootstock, and that's pretty much in this climate, putting them on life support. So We've gone for a more extensive approach on that in an agroforestry system, which again we'll discuss later.
Yeah. And just briefly, let's pause on that sort of, I suppose, shifting of thinking. What were there sort of set causes, set reasons why you began to shift your thinking of where you're heading?
I think probably a risk-based analysis of the business. And if you've got a big commitment to one customer, it doesn't work for everyone. And this is I've got to wear caution on this advice, because it doesn't work for everyone. You either develop a market. The big advantage is if you've got one big customer, you've got one big market, you know what you're doing. It's a very more of a sound business. But I tended to want to have the other opposite effect, was reduce my risk and be a bit more fleet of foot and seeing really what smaller, more extensive opportunities there might be. That's a sort of theme of it, but without being too specific.
Yeah. You mentioned the fruit tree planting, and you planted around 50,000 new trees since 2007. How are those done commercially?
Very mixed. I mentioned about discovering an M9 rootstock is like a dwarf rootstock. What that does, it filters the amount of nutrition and therefore controls the amount of growth that goes through the roots up into the tree. And it does mean the trees are less resistant to disease and pests, and so that's really not such a good decision on the tree planting. Plus, when you plant an orchard, you can't be half pregnant, and the cider market is quite whimsical.
Yeah.
There's a lot of moves towards this sweet, sickly, I'm bound to say that, fruit in cider, and that's meant a bittersweet market for apples, which was our saviour in so much as you couldn't source bittersweet fruit from around the globe. You can now source apples or apple concentrate from anywhere. So there's been an awful lot of change in land use in Herefordshire, particularly with cider orchards being grubbed up.
Okay. I mean, can we dig a bit more into that? Because we barely mention cider on the show, which apart from our local pub has a cider festival on at the moment. And my brain is, I would say, is in a much worse state because of it this week. Give us an overview of the cider market and how's it doing now?
Poorly. Obviously, you had the COVID situation, but on top of that, the trends of consumption towards more sweet ciders and fruit additions. So yeah, for Herefordshire, it's been a bad thing. And if you look at which again we'll touch on later, I think, but look at the land use between 2016 and 2020. There's a large switch from permanent cropping to arable. And this feeds into the issues we'll discuss on the River Wye. But one of the big drivers there is the grubbing up of orchards. Mm-hmm. So I've actually been doing that, but I've been terming it not ripping out trees. It's more a case of reconfiguring my orchard into an agroforestry system. I think that sounds a little bit softer on the palate, but the reality is, we've been taking orchards out and making them into a less intensive system where we've got less trees, so more air and light around each tree. We need less chemical inputs to keep it going. We've lifted the crown, which means that the bottom metre and a half, we've taken all the branches away there, so there's airflow underneath. But it also means a mechanical solution to hand picking. At the moment, most cider producers actually shake the tree and the apples fall onto the soil. But as we all know, with soil is an organ which breaks things down. And so if you've got apples on the floor, obviously they're going to start breaking down. So you get the rots and the quality isn't there. So we're trying to reshift the emphasis a bit on the whole thing so that we can supply craft cider makers who appreciate the quality.
Let's talk a bit about you and your sort of journey to where you are now. So going back a bit, you studied agriculture at Newcastle. Take us back to that time.
Could I take you back a bit further?
Yeah, of course.
My schooling. I wasn't particularly keen on the academic side of things, but perhaps where I excelled was things like captaincy on the rugby field, captain of 3 teams consecutively, 3 age groups.
Yeah.
And those sort of carried over into my university career, I would say. It was a great place to discover myself. I'd say I sort of realised I was quite an activist. Enjoyed problem solving, and I do a lot of swimming and cycling now. Pretty independent as well. So I didn't really know it at the time, but subsequently I wouldn't really fit into a formal business situation particularly well. I could excel in it, but I didn't really enjoy it.
Yeah.
And I suppose that's the same if you work for yourself in most anything. And the academic side, I like to think I'm pretty straightforward, and I'm really keen on tacit knowledge. You don't go into farming as a rational business decision. You do it for a challenge.
That's true enough.
Yeah, and a good example would be my dissertation, where it was about russet Burbank potatoes, which were developed in the 19th century. And McDonald's had a demand for them because they were rectangular and they made good fries, as we call them. But that really didn't resonate with the academia situation, because all they wanted was you to plagiarize, I don't know, about half a dozen. You're only worthy to plagiarize half a dozen reports from PhD students and regurgitate that. So whereas it's something practical that I could see had an application, it got me some work after college.
Yep. But
it didn't really fit with me. So brilliant time, great university. Wouldn't discourage anyone from going there, but for me, the academic side wasn't really the big part of it.
Okay. And where did you go directly after that?
Yorkshire.
Okay.
Yeah, I started working my way south.
Gonna say gradually.
Yeah. Well, yeah, nobody really heard of Newcastle inherited other than beating them in the FA Cup in 1972. It's about the only thing we've got to be proud of in a sporting sense. Yorkshire was RHM Ingredients, and they were a food vector, a food ingredient vector. So they supplied all sorts of rusk, breadcrumbs, seasonings to all sorts of companies. So it was a great start in the food industry. Then I ended up in United Biscuits making sandwiches. That was pretty interesting. On a senior team, mid-20s, turnover more than Manchester United.
Wow.
Yeah, just right place, right time. They got in with Marks and Spencers. It really took off. Got promoted within them, but in having a promotion, it's a long story. But the job that I promoted to didn't exist, and so that was it for me. I thought, well, they don't really value people here too much, and so we moved on. I ended up after redundancy a mile down the road working for Whitbread, which was a better job, better pay. So yet another. These things just come along, but you've got to put yourself in uncomfortable positions, I think, and that's paid off for me time and time again, because I can cope with it, but it is the only way, the best way for me to learn and to find experiences.
I think that's such a good
very
point.
Much a good pattern of my career.
Yeah, we don't grow unless we put ourselves in those sort of places. Take a bit of a sidestep. This is a bit random, but you gained a commercial helicopter license.
Oh, well, that was putting myself in my next uncomfortable position.
Yeah, I suppose it makes sense. Why?
I wanted a transferable skill.
Okay.
I'd become disillusioned within the business thing. I was talking to the head office at Whitbread, but I was only any good where I was in the senior team. And I thought I wanted a transferable skill, and people thought I was mad. I think I sold my car, sold my house. I proposed to my wife in that order, but he must be loaded. He owns a helicopter.
Exactly. She said yes. So
poor little 2-seater helicopter with the money, and went off and started flying. It was a great thing to do. It was fantastic. But the skills I picked up there would be very much on the communication. Was a massive skill.
Okay.
If you're sat next to so I became an instructor, and it's kind of a rich man's hobby.
Okay.
And I'd be sat next to I'll give you an example, the managing director of Dell Computers, or one of the directors of Amazon UK.
Wow. And
you'd be screaming towards the ground with your engine disengaged at 2,000 feet per minute, and you've got, 20 seconds to react, and you've got to land the thing without his engine on, and you're trying to teach them to do this. you soon learn how to communicate. So you had a special relationship with these people, and you'd phone up their office to speak to them, and you speak to their PA, and they're like Rottweilers, but as soon as they say your name, it's we'll put you straight through kind of thing. So
That is
that was the first thing,
fascinating.
communication.
Okay.
Oh yeah, if you're flying Silverstone and you've got, I don't know, one movement every 20 seconds, it's apparently Vietnam's the only helicopter maneuver situation that's been more intense than Silverstone used to be before they built it up and developed it. So that, yeah, again, you had to communicate there. You had 6 channels you were working on the RT radio box, and then it was the open culture of aviation. If you make a mistake, you own up to it, you discuss it so that somebody else won't make that mistake. And that's a really important aspect that we can learn from, and that resonates on my farm with my crew.
Yeah,
a
bit like being at Groundswell last week, actually.
What's that there?
Well, as a culture of just opening up
yes.
about your mistakes.
Yeah, it is. It's like I sit down and oh God, see, I've reversed something into this, or I've broken that. It's like, well, did you set out to do it? No. Were you being reckless? No. Right. Well, let's talk about it and see how we won't do it again. It's no point getting upset about it. You do get individuals that are reckless, but if you've got an open culture, they feel less pressure. There's less red mist. You just get on with it. Because that's a big frustration in farming, isn't it? Machinery and stuff. You learn that machinery is there to be respected, and especially a helicopter where your life sort of depends on it. The servicing is so important, and operating of it and recording of it is so important, and looking after it. But you do learn that you always take the engineer with you that's done all the work on it for its first test flight after a full service. That's one tip.
if anyone out there is considering that, yeah. So when your daughter Lauren was born, you decided that you'd move to the family farm in Herefordshire. I mean, that was a big lifestyle change. Was that sort of the thing that shifted it, or were there other things going on as well?
I got the job in Norwich with Sterling Helicopters, which is where
wow,
Prince William ended up, and
of course they
introduced a new law. They had to wear a helmet, and I just didn't fit in a helicopter. But helicopter, I'm tall, you see, I'm 6'4", 4'28".
Oh, are you? Right.
And so that was a kind of turning point where I thought, well, I'm just going to jigger my back if I've got to wear a helmet. You can't adjust the seats. You've got to go to the Civil Aviation Authority and develop a new seat. That's probably £100,000 to do that. I don't know. So
wow.
That was a big driver in it. So I looked at other aircraft and getting ratings on those. And it was around the time of 9/11. And I looked at going into airlines. I thought, well, I can sit at a computer at home and do something. I was a sort of in a way, a glorified taxi driver, and I'd done it all, and flown into some of the best places in the world to fly into in a helicopter. And I thought, well, actually, I'll go home. I continued doing it at Gloucester, Saverton, 2 days a week. And my father was running the farm with him the rest of the time. So it was kind of like a phased-in approach, but it did give us an opportunity to move away from the southeast and move somewhere and do something perhaps a little bit more meaningful than punching holes in the sky and sort of playing a hoolie.
Fascinating. So what about those first sort of couple of years back on the place? What was that like?
Oh, it was quite an adjustment. Yeah. We sort of consolidated, really, a period of consolidation. I'd always had those. I never had a formal plan, but always had something on the go. And it was probably as much a challenge to get the family sort of settled in over here.
Yeah.
And it's an important fact if anyone's considering moving back to the farm. You've got to respect your partner or wife, husband, whoever. And Mandy, she loves my dad, but she didn't want to be known as Mike Ware's daughter-in-law because it's kind of a stifling environment in Herefordshire, and you've got to find your way in. So it was important not to just do the normal thing and we'll move on to the farm. And so we moved a couple of parishes away, which is a eternity in Herefordshire terms. Yeah, you like foreigners. But, yeah. things like that. But also, I mean, the business was really successful, and we developed it and built on it. And when your back isn't against the wall, perhaps you're not looking so much to new things. You just want to optimize what you have.
Yeah. So it's a good position to be in, dare I say. Absolutely. So I'm going to skip ahead to your Nuffield scholarship now, but as you mentioned earlier, this was your Nuffield was almost it was quite far along down the process. But you did your Nuffield scholarship in 2011. Your subject was remaining competitive in the top fruit industry. I mean, I think because you must have been in Stephen Briggs's, Tom Bradshaw, Tim May. He must have been in your cohort.
Yeah,
as well.
they were all. That was our cohort. Yeah, we had a good group. I think if Carlsberg had to invent a group, you'd use that one.
Yeah.
As the advertising parlance goes. Yeah, it was excellent. It was another one of those things where you put yourself into another place. I mean, if you think about the helicopters, I went from being a pretty senior manager in a big multinational with a secure job and everything, back to becoming the most junior pilot in Virgin Airlines, kind of thing. And it is a similar thing, really, isn't it? At the age I was at, I didn't need to go and do it, but actually I met some of the most stimulating company people on the, not just the cohort, but also on my way around. And I had a bit of an agenda. I didn't want to do a big report. I mean, I think I do have criticisms on that field, and I know people roll their eyes when they hear about it, and I do to some extent. And everyone comes back and they're full of enthusiasm and invigorated, but you're just in danger of repeating what you've seen, which might work in New Zealand, it might work somewhere else, but unless you come back and test it and everything, it won't. You don't even know whether it's going to work on your farm, let alone anyone else's. So I think there's a bedding in period that you need, and this is where I talk again about tacit knowledge. It's the same with renewable farming. You've got to try these things because no one there to support you. You're putting yourself in an uncomfortable place. We've been simmering away since 2007 on what you'd call regenerative farming, but when you're out there, you do feel pretty alone and stuff because there's no support or training from the government. So the good thing about the Nuffield was you could go out and see these places where they are trying things. And the Australians are very, very resilient, and that really helped me in 2015 when I had a big major issue on the farm, financial issue. I put myself in uncomfortable places again. I'm repeating that. That's one of the key themes for this. I went to China. I didn't speak a word of Mandarin. I landed there. Basically, it's all about face in there. In terms of there was a show. As soon as the bigwigs disappeared from the show, which was on the first day, it just became a giant car boot sale. I was in China for a week, and they were supposed to be looking after me, but they just buggered off back to Beijing. So what do? I went to look at some pandas in Chengdu. I mean, there's 15 million people in Chengdu. I mean, I never even heard of it, this place. And I'd met one lady at the show who spoke English, who helped me negotiate to get some samples from a Taiwanese company, I think. Anyway, the following day, the people who were supposed to be looking after me disappeared. And so I thought, well, after I've been to see the pandas, there's not much else to do. I realized I was at the capital of the Sichuan province in Chengdu. So I marched up to the government building there almost, and they're changing the cars. They're all armed to the teeth. And I come up and say, I'm from England, I'm doing this. And just blurting out English. And eventually a phone got shoved in my face. And so the voice on the other end says, do you have a problem? I said, well, yeah, your people are supposed to have been looking after me, and they've all buggered off back to Beijing. Oh, right, okay. Can you hand the phone back to the lady with you? And she scribbled down something on a piece of paper. They shoved me in a taxi, and I disappeared across Chengdu, city of 15 million people. And so I'm walking up this, I get bundled out of the taxi, and he points vaguely at this building. I've got a piece of paper in my hand. I don't know what, I've got a clue what it is. And I'm halfway up the street, and then I get a tap on the shoulder. This lady says, hello, do you remember me from yesterday? It's like, what?
What are you doing here?
I'd had a conversation with, And she said, what are you doing here? I said, well, I just gave her the piece of paper. Oh, you've come to see my boss, she said. And that was it. And he thought it was brilliant because it was their opportunity to get back at the authorities in Beijing. So they
Of course.
within hours, I had a driver, a translator, the local agricultural guy, and somebody else. And what do you want to do? But until you put yourself in that position, you don't get these opportunities. And it still took me 3 hours to get to a meeting, 5 minutes in the hotel, but that's another whole story. So yeah, that was kind of Nuffield. I went to China, South America, but also I fitted in, like I said, the Sustainable Ag course in Australia, which I Graham Sates. Yes, I brought over to the UK in 2014 because I thought it really did do a really fantastic.
So in terms of practical application back to your farm, like we were saying earlier, what did you take away, and what did you make any changes, or were you already, because you were already on that path? So what changed?
The light bulb moment. Well, there are two light bulb moments I talk about. One is the phosphorus issue in 2007. I don't want to get too detailed about it, so we'll skip over that for the purpose of this podcast. But the second one was, imagine a row of trees, and beneath the trees you have like a strip of soil, because in the cider world, harvesting was done off the floor, so you didn't want grass underneath the trees because it disrupted the harvest process. And our customer used to quaintly call that the sterile strip.
Okay.
And it occurred to me on a farm visit once that somebody's going to ask a question one day, probably a smart ass professional who trades in words that I'm very disparaging about, would ask the question, well, why are you trying to grow trees in a sterile strip? And that just lodged in my head. Nobody ever asked that question, thank God, but that started me off on a whole tirade of soil and the rabbit holes you talk about. So I bought a mower with a mulcher that used to put the grass that we mowed in the middle between the trees, under the trees as a mulch, and that was the start of our regenerative journey, I would say. We've made everything. It's been a roller coaster ride. We if you said anything that's kind of regenerative related to us, we've probably done it and tried it to various degrees of success. But what we have discovered, it has to be easy to do.
Okay.
And it's got to fit in with your system. And so it's getting the system right. And I know that sounds dull and boring, but that's the most important thing. There's no silver bullet. Dr. Christine Jones was over in a local farm, and she was banging on about, which is quite right, that why are you trying to grow maize with a coating of a fungicide on it? And this is just mad. And on the way back to the cars, there was a trailer with some product on it. Everyone like flies around shit on that, but it's not about product. Products help, but it's only part of the whole thing. And you've got to put together a system that works for you, works for your farm, but also works for the soil and the whole nature side of things. And that's the biggest point. So that's the most difficult thing to get across. It's very easy to say, oh yeah, you should try using humates or brew this or compost that, but no, it's the system that's the most important thing.
Yeah. And in finding out that system, what hasn't worked so well?
I've set up to everything there. Well, you did want to talk about compost later on. I struggle with making compost. I do it, but it's the right thing to do. But it is just such a intensive, difficult thing to do. You just need so much space and compaction, and if you don't do it properly, you get weed burdens. And I think it's when you do things with best of intentions. So we had an iron deficiency, so you buy iron, but then you start to antagonize other minerals. You can get yourself too detailed about things.
Okay.
We started doing sap analysis. A lot of my work was done probably regeneratively on trees, but we did sort of pay some attention to the wheat. You'd get the results back and micromanage them, and in the end, you just got to resolve to have luxury levels of magnesium, calcium, boron, and phosphorus if the system allows it. And then the rest have to fall into place. You get to know what's what, but if you start adding too much of one thing, it will just antagonize something else, and it's a very delicate thing. So get your calcium, magnesium right in the soils, and then foliar applications to to let the soil rest, and then you're away.
Okay. Let's talk about compost now, because I think it was Mike Abram actually wrote a feature in Farmers Weekly recently about composting. He visited Simon Cowell, which a lot of listeners probably knows as Essex farmer. And in that, we're talking about, I think that there was just, it's the importance of temperature and aeration. What is your experience with it?
Very difficult to do. You're talking about tonnage, high tonnages. I've always had a bit of a thing about compost. You start with a pile, let's say 2 meters high, and by the time you finish, it's 1.2 meters high. So you've lost at least 35 to 40% of your mass. So how carbon efficient is compost? It's all about volatilization of gases. It's not all moisture that you've lost from the pile. So you lost heat energy because it heats up, and you lost carbon, surely, because as in terms of carbon dioxide. So what you're trying to achieve with compost is really to stabilize whatever nutrients you have there, and to apply some biology to your farm and some organic matter. But is it the most efficient way of doing it? I don't think so. I think if you can compost in a field effectively with green manures and that type of thing, surely that's got to be a lot better. But if you have the resource there, which I do have in terms of where I can apply my poultry litter, then it's not a bad thing. But what the discussions I started having with Graham Sate, who ran the Sustainable Ag course all the way back in 2011, and when he came over in 2014, I said exactly that, and he said that there was a guy who's a good friend of his called Jerry Brunetti, and he'd got some what he called facultative bacteria that would effective microorganisms, I think they call them, which would essentially ferment your manures and your mucks. So we're moving very much down in that direction to see if we can try and secure the nutrition and maintain that with the ammonia not becoming ammonia in our poultry litter.
Okay.
And making the phosphorus. It's all about, to me, it was all about phosphorus solubilization or phosphorus availability within the manures when I was making them. But if we can achieve that and effectively capture the carbon and keep it there and keep everything together, then I think that's a better all-round system. It's not going to be the optimal system, and I do agree with the composting purist that it's a better product probably at the end of the day. But actually, it's a bloody nuisance to do, and it's just. I think there's too much waste in the system. So I think there's a best of both worlds: a soil conditioner, which is made from a manure that we can actually utilize all the nutrition within it virtually, or 95% of it, and have those facultative bacteria. Now those are bacteria that will exist either in anaerobic or aerobic conditions. So what happens is when they're in so how technical do you want me to get, Ben?
Oh no, I mean, from my point of view, this is fascinating. Well, but
to put it simply, and I tend to try and keep it simple. If you've got a pH below 6.5, then you're going to have less volatilization of gases from any manures, which is why your slurry, there's grounds for slurry systems with acidification in that. Now, what happens if you have facultative bacteria is that they will be able to exist in an anaerobic conditions, and they do that generally by splitting the water, usually utilizing the oxygen from the water. And what happens with that is that you freed up the hydrogen ions. So if you've got hydrogen ions, what the free hydrogen ions are measure off your acidity. So it tends to bring the pH down within your manure or whatever, your compost, whatever you want to call, soil conditioner, whatever you want to call it. And so it's like a double benefit there to some extent. And then when you do actually go to spread it, we've been baling poultry manure, which is another thing we could talk about.
Okay.
But when you come to spread it, then they spring into life, and they've got the oxygen, and they just take off. So you won't have the range you might have in a compost. You won't have the the fungi that you have in a compost. And we do spray something in there, so we got some spores there of those other aerobic fungi and bacteria. But you've given a stimulation with some organic matter and food source to your soils when you spread it, which will then start the soil food web and ramp it into action. So you're not actually adding everything you need, but it'll trigger the soil food web into action, and it'll then cycle through the bacteria, fungi, protozoa, worms, and back. And the worms love it. I mean, they'll eat it. They'll consume this fermented product very, very readily.
Wow, exciting. Let's talk about your phosphorus story. Let's turn towards that, because we should mention the River Wye at least once in this podcast, because we have said that we would. Give us some background to your phosphate issues.
We've got a major issue with the River Wye, and I suppose the elephant in the room is phosphorus or chicken manure.
Yeah.
If we take a step back, the big issue with the River Wye is the algal bloom, so it basically turns green in the summer. So phosphorus is getting a bad rap for this, and it's very easy to then become defensive about the whole thing and say, well, if it's all about agriculture and stuff, what about the water board? The sewage, the 420,000 stormwater releases that we've had over the last 12 months in England and Wales. What about their phosphorus stripping or lack of in the thing, grey wastes, that sort of thing. But the reason why we can't just start becoming defensive is because there's a new report called the Refocus report out of Lancaster University. And the important thing to realise about that is that it's about phosphorus efficiency in the whole food system. And so it's a spin-off from that they've done a report on the Wye catchment.
Yep.
So it's very much focused on the food system, all right? So what that report doesn't include is the major integrators. It doesn't mention them in the poultry side of things in particular. It doesn't mention the water authorities, biosolids, that type of thing. And it doesn't mention anaerobic digestion, which we've got some excellent farmers around here that have got AD plants that undersow their maize and do a really good job of it, and they responsibly utilise their digestate, liquid and solid. Contrary to that is there are other farmers perhaps that don't actually have such a high regard for their soils. Will rent land. It'll be autumn sown maize, autumn sown potatoes, so they have to grow that as well. Then they'll go into fodder beet. Every time there's a fallow over winter, and half the soil gets washed into the River Wye, but it's not their soil because they've rented the fields. And then the following spring, they go through and mother it, they dump a load of digestate on their liquid and solid, and then carry on. So there are whole layers to this whole argument. But the big thing is that we don't know if it's phosphate. If you look at the phosphate levels on the River Wye, and this is why your listeners should really focus and pay attention now, because if you measure the River Wye, the levels of phosphate in there are lower perhaps than the River Severn and Team in a lot of instances, and certainly the River Thames. But they all have their own issues with phosphorus. Now, whether it's more urban there, we don't know. But certainly the report from Refocus, Lancaster University, suggesting that agriculture is responsible for 65% of the phosphorus in the River Wye, and that it's about 3,000 tonnes of phosphorus per year in the catchment, which is 417 kilometres squared. That is responsible from agriculture. So we can't stick our heads in the soil, as it were, and ignore it. But the reality is, in my mind, phosphorus is the big one, because I've learned since 2007, when we had reports of phosphorus indices of 4s on our farm, that it just sticks about. That's the whole thing with phosphorus. It sticks there. It's a big element. It's basically, if it's acidic soils, it's a voracious anion. It's got 3 negative charges. What else has negative charges in the soil? Clay. So it's going to compete with that for other minerals. So it tends to bind in acid soils to aluminium or iron in particular. And if you've got alkaline soils, then it will bind up your calcium, which is not a good thing. And it's an absolute bugger to get up into your plants, because I was finding massive or surplus of phosphorus in my soils, but I was finding deficiencies in the tissue analysis as far back as 2011.
Okay.
We really didn't understand it, and until you start measuring young leaves and old leaves, and you appreciate that phosphorus is very mobile within the plant, that you start to get a pattern of what's going on. So that's why phosphorus is a big thing. But in the River Wye, this algal bloom might be caused by nitrates, excess nitrates. But the convenient thing about those is they can gas off, whereas phosphorus won't. It'll just stay there. So you can't really pin that one down. It might be that it's due to the flooding washing out the ranunculus weed, which tends to be a habitat for all sorts of aerobic water life, and so that is for the good of the river. It also might be the temperature of the water, but the temperature of the water depends on flow. If we are extracting too much, then you've got less flow, therefore it tends to be a higher temperature. There's all sorts of arguments. If you look at that, I'll kind of show you. This is really bad for a podcast.
That's fine. We can try and describe it.
I want to get your reaction. So that's 2016 land use.
Okay.
Red and yellow is sort of arable, and green is permanent. And then that's 2020. Now,
blimey.
Yeah.
Wow.
Herefordshire. Right. That was the right reaction I expected.
Wow.
In terms of phosphorus, well, whatever we do to remediate phosphorus, we've got to get our pH correct. As I've just said, it needs to be between 6.5 and 7. We've got to get enough moisture in the soil. Soil moisture should be 25%. You can achieve that with increasing your organic matter, because it's like a sponge. You've got to get your biology right. So, and this all sounds like a on roach. It sounds like I'm just repeating everything they've told you at groundswell, but it's true. If you get your biology, you start to get your column levels right for the soil porosity. That helps your air porosity. So what am I saying? Is it's a huge opportunity for us to redress some of the poor agricultural disciplines that we've fallen out of, and we need to get them back. You've just seen those charts. We need to really think long and hard about how the modern agricultural systems are perhaps too much of a good thing. We need to really think about and focus on using manures and where we use them, and we need to think about, well, we can use it, but actually it might be detrimental to our soils and locking up a lot of things. So there's a whole raft of issues here.
Yeah, so I mean, because obviously last week we were looking at the Welsh side of the border on a Herefordshire basis. What are some of the solutions that you guys are proposing locally?
Yeah, well, there's two things with the River Wye. One is that it's cross-border, so we have different agencies involved, and the second thing is an SSSSI. So that means that the targets are that much lower than other rivers. That's not necessarily a bad thing, because we're addressing the issues now. But the difference across the border in terms of poultry manure, I mean, I did an interview for Hereford and Worcester, and I said on that, I said, the problem isn't necessarily the poultry farm, it's what happens downstream of it. Now, I had to clarify myself very quickly by saying, what I meant to say was, it's the poultry manure that leaves the site that is the issue. It's not necessarily the poultry farm itself, because the majority of Herefordshire poultry farms are indoor farms, reared, and they have containment of that manure, so it's all very controlled.
Yeah.
But if you then deliver it to an anaerobic digestion plant, well, you're just kicking a can down the road, because that phosphorus won't gas off. So whatever goes in will come out the other end, and then you've got to deal with it into the form of digestate, or even worse, liquid digestate. So that's our issue in Herefordshire. Whereas across the board in Wales, it would be true to say that the majority of their more recent development in poultry has been more free range. So they have and more layers. So they have different type of litter than the meat birds, but mainly it's the ranging that's the issue there. And so it's creating buffers within that system, like settling ponds at the bottom of the hill before it gets in the river, that type of thing. So we do have several different factors there compared to Wales.
Let's move on to let's talk about your insects. I mean, you've got a lot going on anyway. Where did this come from?
But this could be a very quick conversation, because we started growing crickets about 4 years ago, and at the moment the Food Standards Agency didn't take the transition interpretation that we were told, so we've had to stop at the moment because of whilst they deliberate about the efficacy of or the legal side of insects in our food chain. The idea is that we can grow waste streams on the farm and share it with the insects, so it fits in the whole system. But it's there, it's in the background. We know how to do it. We've got the facility there, but it is the timing. We were probably too early into it.
Okay. Chickens. Yeah. So you moved from, I suppose this is largely related to your phosphorus story as well. You moved from broilers to rearing pullets for commercial egg farms.
Yeah.
How has that shift gone?
Well, we enjoy it. It's a new challenge. It's slightly less intensive. Like I said earlier in the thing, it's not about getting the birds across the line to slaughter. You want your customers to have a pullet at the point of lay at 16 weeks old that's ready for producing eggs for them on their farms. And so, it's a different outlook, and we've enjoyed that.
Yeah. What sort of numbers are you up to now?
I don't know. I try not to do numbers now. I'm just holding that. Haven't you been listening?
Yeah, you don't.
I've still got 6 sheds. Yeah, it can be up to 155,000.
Yeah.
I did have a moment during lockdown when we were doing our bit completely unrecognised for the nation and feeding them. I worked out how many eggs those pullets would go on to make in 12 to lay in 12 months, and I think I said
how many millions?
300. It was millions of eggs. I can't even remember. Yeah. So we play our part. Although we don't do it ourselves. There's some great guys out there, and the nice thing is our customers there are farmers, the same as ourselves. They come to the farm, and we can talk about growing chickens. I don't want to particularly talk about bureaucracy or paperwork or this piece of paper doesn't look right. It's all about the birds, and they appreciate that, I hope, when they come down.
Just for a second, I want to highlight your farm website to listeners for a minute, because I think what you actually do on there is you present things very clearly, very concisely, right the way through, from farming year, soil diagrams, your own farming story. So listeners, do check that out at thronefarm.co.uk. But within that, you do mention sort of where you're going, looking to the future. You have a small solar array, for example, decarbonising as a project. Take us forward where you're going. What's next?
Baling poultry muck. Yeah. I mean, the Herefordshire emblem is the Hereford bull, and this refocus report says we're now producing more chicken muck than we are cow muck. So we don't talk bullshit anymore now in Herefordshire. We're talking about chicken shit.
That might have to be the title of this episode.
Yeah. So seriously, the baling. I've invested in a baler. It's something. It's kind of a good vehicle for the message of the whole message of kind of regenerative farming and making the most of what we've been given. And that's a really good story, but it's also a sound proposition. So we're going to concentrate on that. But actually, I've decided I want to consolidate a bit, because we've tried so many things. It's just making those things work better that we know that work on our farm. And so brewing, getting a bit better at that, getting a bit better at application, and just really trying to ramp that up. So I'm sorry if that's a bit of a dull answer, but that's what it's important. I think you have spurts of growth and innovation, and then you just consolidate, and that's what we're trying to do a little bit, whilst we've got this baling initiative going on as well.
Yeah. That's fine. We can cope with dull on the show. I don't think that's dull at all. We always finish the show with the same two questions. We're going to start rounding things up. The first is, if you have a message for the public, Stephen, what would it be?
Where do I start? If you've listened to my sentiment about regenerative farming, I think it's quite similar to the whole scenario with human health. And everything matches. The calcium to magnesium ratios in the soil match the human body. And it's all about biofortification. So it's the same with the whole system. And we've learned over the last couple of years that isn't necessarily the silver bullet. Well, I don't think it's the silver bullet that's going to help us. I think it's prevention of type 2 diabetes, of obesity, that type of thing.
Yep.
So my overriding message is to value your food and your own health, and to appreciate what you get, and try and understand that you've got to take some responsibility for your own well-being and your own health, and we're here to help you.
And finally, a message for farmers.
Oh, this is difficult because my situation is so difficult, so different from everyone else's, and it's very easy to, especially at somewhere like Groundswell, you get the evangelists there, and it's all words, isn't it? You do need tacit knowledge, and you do need to work out what works at your place, on your patch, in your system, in your financial constraints and everything. So I really do find it difficult to lecture farmers, but I would say one thing: cherish your natural assets and face up to your environmental responsibilities. I suppose it would be my overriding things there. It's all very well saying switch to regenerative farming, but enterprises are failing at the moment. It's no fault of the farmers. It's the markets and the change that we're in. So I'd like to say, on the one hand, yes, stick on it, stick with it, but it's very difficult if sticking with regenerative transition if you've got other constraints and financial pressures and everything else going on. So I would say, cherish your natural assets, face up to environmental responsibilities, and if you're going to consider regeneration, just don't go cold turkey, just get a hybrid system, find out what works. Very simple thing. Glyphosate, add citric acid, 2.9 pH, and a humate, and you'll use half the amount of glyphosate. That works. Bang. Just introduce those simple things, those types of things, and don't try and over try with it initially, and work your way in. But things are changing so quickly; it's very difficult to actually prescribe anything.
Yeah. Well, we'll leave it there.
Sorry, that wasn't very concise, but
no, it's fine. Thank you honestly so much, Stephen. I mean, there is a massive amount to unpack in this episode. I know for one thing, I think when I go through the editing process, I'm going to be listening acutely to lots of those things.
Yeah, we didn't really touch on the agroforestry.
We didn't. I mean, we can go back and do more if you want, but I think there's plenty in there anyway. But
yeah, just to make your listeners aware, and I used to show a slide of a row of trees, and I used to call it tunnel vision, and it's like that on a farm. And so the more people that visit your website and engage with you on social media, and we're not very good at it, but when I do send something out, I like to think it's meaningful and interesting.
Yeah.
Rather than, I went down the field and tipped some muck today, So please do engage. That's all I'll ask. And we thrive on dialogue. So
How do people follow you on social media?
So I've got a Facebook page, which I think is, you can get it linked through the website thronefarm.co.uk.
Brilliant.
I think that's Throne Farm Webley.
Cool.
And then the Instagram is, you'd have to get that from the website. There's a few videos on YouTube as well. You can get all the links from there, normal way. Yeah.
Great. Go and check that out, listeners. Thank you very much for listening. Please do subscribe to the show on whatever podcast platform you're using, and share it on social media if you enjoyed this episode. Next time, I will be, it's a site visit actually. I'm on the ground. I'll be in Somerset on a traditional mixed farm estate talking to Hermione Warmington. So please join me then. I am Ben Eagle. This has been Meet the Farmers, and I hope you all have a great week.